Hi guys, welcome to our second Facebook Live here at the Fort Worth Zoo. My name is Kylie, I'm an interpretive specialist here, and I'm going to be giving a chat on our hippos today. I am also joined with one of our awesome African Savannah keepers, Neil here. He's going to be doing the training with Bubbles and being a little bit closer to her, and look, there she is ready to go. I'm not sure if you guys saw her on land before she came into the water, but she knows what time it is. That's why she's up here doing this training right now. Bubbles is 26 years old and she weighs around 2,600 pounds. Now you might be thinking, wow, that's a really big animal. And it is a really big animal, but believe it or not, she's actually on the smaller side for an adult female hippo. But just like people can range in different heights, hippos can also range in different weights. So she is around 2,600 pounds. She kind of fluctuates around that number on a day-to-day basis. So we do get a good weight on her every day, every other day, depending on if she wants to participate in that training or not. And you guys can see this training that's happening right now is also a really good indicator of her care that she receives here at the Fort Worth Zoo. So that target that you are seeing right now, that Neil is holding out, which is a buoy on a stick, is really important for that weight training and that scale training that we did, so that we could use the target to have Bubbles walk over onto the scale so that we can get that weight on her. So she knows when she touches her nose to that buoy that she is going to be rewarded with some of her favorite foods. So you can see she's going to target, she touched her nose, and Neil throws in one of her favorite snacks. Now, she is getting a really wide variety of different foods today. She's getting different types of melons. She's got cucumbers in there, but a hippo's absolute favorite food is what Neil has in his hand right now, and that's gonna be watermelon. They love watermelon. It is super juicy, it is sweet, it is very good for them nutritionally, but it's kind of similar to like ice cream for us, or for myself, I should say. Now, the other type of training that you guys are noticing with Bubbles is that Neil is having her open her mouth. Now, this is really important because he needs to be able to look inside of her mouth, look at her teeth, make sure all of her teeth look like they are in good order, make sure that she doesn't have any abrasions on the inside of her mouth. That might need to be looked at, or maybe the vets might need to come look at it. So that's why that training is really important, so that we can look inside of her mouth to make sure that everything looks a-okay there and that she is in tip-top shape. Now, Bubbles is really eager to train because she is incredibly food motivated. She absolutely loves food. So she will always come over and participate in this training because she knows she's going to be rewarded with her favorite snacks. Hippos are herbivores, and an herbivore is an animal that only eats plants and vegetables. So that's why her favorite snacks are going to be watermelon, cucumber, different types of melons, that type of thing, because those are going to be the things that she doesn't eat as often, and it's not a main part of her diet. So here at the zoo, Bubbles is given coastal hay, which is just a type of grass, and it's hay for her. That's going to be the main part of her diet. And then another thing that she is offered is going to be grain. So we give her grain because it's going to have all of the nutrients that she needs to make sure that she is living a healthy life here at the Fort Worth Zoo. And then she gets this nice produce for training, or for a nice snack if she doesn't want to participate in training, because this is all her choice if she wants to come over and participate. So out in Africa, where hippos are found in the rivers, they are going to be spending about 16 hours a day in the water, and then about 8 hours a day on land eating the grasses that they will find out there. So they are going to be eating a lot of grass and occasionally eating produce if they come across it, because we just talked about how hippos are herbivores. So that is what their main diet is going to be, is just grass, just plants, just vegetables, just fruits. So they do have a really good sense of hearing, even though their ears are kind of small. They can hear fruit falling from trees, and that's how they are able to find the fruit whenever they are out in the African savannas near the river systems out in Africa. But like I said, they're going to be eating a majority of grass. So you might be looking at her teeth and wondering, well, if she's an herbivore, why does she have a lot of those really big teeth in the front? because a lot of people assume that that's for eating meat, but it's actually not. Those front teeth that you see, they are actually tusks. Just like elephants have tusks, hippos have tusks as well. So it's just a modified tooth that is actually made out of ivory. So those tusks are ever growing, which means that they are constantly growing, constantly getting longer, but then they do break off and fall out and grow back, and then they will actually rub against each other so that they can smooth apart since they are always growing. So you can see Bubbles, she has all of those tusks right there. And the reason that hippos have those tusks, since they don't use them for eating any type of food, it's actually to protect themselves from some other hippos. So hippos are going to be a gregarious animal, and the word gregarious just means that they're pretty social. They do live in large groups. They like to be around other hippos just for protection purposes. That's just their natural behavior. Looks like Bubbles did decide to...
She slipped off.
She went back down underwater, which is fine. She's in a sunny spot, so she needs to get her skin rehydrated so that she can make sure that her skin is nice and healthy. There she is. She's back up. She loves to participate in training, like I said. So those teeth are to help protect her from maybe another hippo if they're just not getting along. Maybe they're having a disagreement that day, so they do open their mouths and communicate with each other that way by opening their mouths and interacting in that way. But male hippos do use their tusks and that open mouth behavior a lot when they are protecting their females, protecting their calves, and protecting their space. So that's why they have those tusks. It's all for defense. So these guys, I did mention, get out onto land to eat their grass. That's what their main part of their diet is going to be. But they do get out onto land at night. How many of you guys at home knew that hippos were nocturnal? When I was first learning about hippos, I didn't even know that. So it's always good to be learning new things about these animals that we have here at the zoo. So hippos, they do, like I said earlier, spend about 16 hours a day in the water. And that is all going to be when it is the hottest time in Africa, when the sun is always out, so that they can keep their skin nice and moist and protected from the sun. And then they're going to be conserving their energy during that time as well, which makes them nocturnal. So they are going to be sleeping, relaxing, just kind of hanging out in the shallow parts of the river systems out in Africa. And then when the sun starts to go down, that's when their skin is safe to go up onto land and eat the grass. Now, if you've been to the zoo, I am sure if you've come during the middle of the day and you haven't made it to see one of our training sessions, you probably did see our hippos sleeping, relaxing in the shallow portions of our habitat here at the Fort Worth Zoo, and that is incredibly normal behavior. We like for our animals to do normal behavior that they would be doing out in the wild. So the fact that Bubbles would be sleeping during this time of day is actually really good. She just knows that it's training time, which also breaks up her day as well, which is really enriching for her to make sure that she stays mentally and physically stimulated. And it's super important for us to maintain this relationship with her, which is why I'm doing a lot of the talking and Neil is doing all of the training. So something I really like to talk about with hippos is some of their adaptations that they have. Now, if you watched our first Facebook Live with Olivia, you were learning about adaptations with our giraffes. So hippos have an adaptation that you guys might recognize from another animal that lives in a river system, and that is going to be that their eyes, ears, and nose are all on top of their head. Now, if you guys were here, I would ask you, why do you think that is? But since you guys aren't here and we have to do all of this virtually, I'm just going to give you the answer. So the reason that their eyes, ears, and nose are all on top of their head is so that they are able to stay fully submerged in the waters when they are in there, but come up and take a breath of air if they need to, come up and look at their surroundings, and come up and hear what is around them as well. The animal that has a similar head shape is, of course, an alligator and a crocodile, which are also going to be living in aquatic ecosystems as well. That's an adaptation that they have so that they are able to successfully thrive in those aquatic ecosystems by making sure that their skin is protected from the sun as much as possible. I did mention that these guys do hang out in the shallow portions of the water, and that is because hippos are super dense animals. They have very short, stubby legs, and like I just said, they're super dense. So they actually sink to the bottom of whatever body of water that they are on. So they have to stay in the shallow areas when they are relaxing and when they are sleeping. That's really important so that they are able to come up and take that breath of air and look at their surroundings if they need to. Now, whenever they do move around in their surroundings, it looks like Bubbles has gone down in the water. Like I said, it is sunny, so she needs to rehydrate and moisturize that skin. That's really important, but there she is. She's right back up after she got that moisturized on her skin. But it's really important for them to be in those shallow waters so that they are able to see, breathe, and hear. But when they are moving, they're going to sink straight to the bottom and walk across whatever body of water that they are on. And then they do something that helps identify their closest living relative, and that's going to be a porpoise or a whale. So they do something called porpoising if they need to come up and take a breath of air, where they're walking on across maybe a deep body of water. They will shoot up really quickly, take a breath of air, and then they're going to sink back down to the bottom of whatever body of water that they are on. And like I just said, it's called porpoising. So that's how you can identify that hippos are closely related to whales, which is really interesting. So I have rambled on a lot. I would love to know maybe if anyone has any questions. We'd love to answer any questions that you guys might have. Just feel free to type them out in the comment section there.
Someone is asking, I know we covered this, what are they eating?
What are they eating? That's a great question. So Bubbles is eating some of her favorite food right now, which is watermelon. Hippos absolutely love watermelon. It's super juicy, it's super sweet. That's one of their favorite snacks. But that's not the only thing that Bubbles gets here at the Fort Worth Zoo. She is going to be getting hay, which is the grass portion of her diet that she would be getting out in Africa. Then she also gets a grain, which is made specifically for hippos and herbivores here at the Fort Worth Zoo. So that grain is going to be giving them all of the nutrients that they need to make sure that they are living a healthy life here at the Fort Worth Zoo. Now, she's not only getting watermelon, but that's what looks like our last few treats are gonna be. She was also getting cucumber and another type of melon as well.
How much do they eat in a day?
That's a great question. So it kind of depends on the activity level of the hippo, how much they're going to be eating. I know here at the zoo we offer them around 100 pounds of food a day, which can make up mostly of the grain and the hay and then a little bit of the produce. But sometimes if a hippo is being really relaxed and not doing a lot of activity during their day, they actually only eat about 10% of their body weight a day. So Bubbles being around 2,600 pounds, if she's being really low energy, she doesn't need to take in a lot of calories, she would eat maybe about 25 pounds of food, but that's not always the case. She's pretty active here at the zoo, so she probably eats somewhere around 60 to 75 pounds of food a day, depending on her activity level that day.
Sasha wants to know how long can they hold their breath?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if maybe we want to swing around to our underwater viewing area so that we can see Bubbles moving around. She can hold her breath for about 5 minutes. Sometimes, give or take the activity level, that means they might be able to need to come up and take a little bit more breath of air. But if they're sleeping, which they can actually come up and take a breath of air while staying asleep, they could probably hold their breath for about 5 minutes. Hippos have something called an involuntary reflux. So if she is asleep and her brain is like, you need oxygen, she will stay asleep and then come up and take a breath of air, which is actually something that's really cool and another adaptation that they have. So we're walking to our underwater viewing right now because I wanted you guys to see how hippos actually move, because we get asked all the time, how fast can hippos swim? And you're looking at Bubbles right now, who is in her underwater viewing area. She's gonna sink straight to the bottom right now. Hippos actually cannot swim. So I mentioned earlier that they have these short legs, so they walk across the body of water that they are on, and then they're gonna come up and take a breath of air if they need it, and they actually can't swim. So that's always something fun that I like to talk with all of you guys about, because that's a question that we get asked so often, is how fast can they swim? And the answer is they can't. So
are hippos endangered?
That's a really good question. Hippos are listed as vulnerable on the IUC and Red List, which means that their populations aren't super stable, but they're also not super endangered. They're kind of at that middle mark right now. One of the biggest conflicts that hippos have is that there is just human conflicts with them. So sometimes their habitat is being fragmented on by people, and that does cause a lot of conflict between them and with people. And I did talk about earlier how hippos do have ivory in their tusks, and that is unfortunately something that hippos are poached for. So we actually have one of the hippo's tusks because, like I mentioned earlier, they do fall off. They break off, they just naturally come off, and they are ever growing. So they do grow back. As you saw, Bubbles had all of her tusks, but she's back there now. But they are listed as vulnerable. So something that we can do to help out hippos in their natural range is just by making sure that we are doing our part here in Texas. So conserving our water levels, that is something that's really important since she is an aquatic animal. So we've got to make sure that those river systems are clean. Recycling is really important, just making sure that it's not getting back into the waters. So those are just some things that we can do to help hippos. And then whenever we are finally able to have you guys come back out by visiting your local zoo, that is something that you can do to help hippos as well.
Jace wants to know why the trainer had a stick.
Oh, that's a great question. So what you guys saw Neil have, that is called Bubbles Target. And targets are really important for animal training because we need to use targets to have an animal that we cannot share space with maybe move somewhere that we need them to go to. So what we do first is we always have the animal come over, touch a part of their body to that target, and then they're rewarded with food. In Bubbles' case, she was touching her nose to that target, and it's really important when behind the scenes, when they had Bubbles step onto the scale for the very first time, she knew if she walked through this area and touched her nose on that target, she was going to be rewarded with the food. And it might be like a smaller area, so she needed to walk through that. She knew it was going to be safe. She was going to be rewarded with food, and then we could get a weight on her to make sure that we're making sure that she's healthy, so that we can monitor her weight level in like every week or maybe even every day.
Marissa and Abel would like to know, what kind of noise do hippos make?
That's a good question. I could press this sound for you. Bubbles sometimes does it. So what hippos do, it's called a bellowing. It might be a little hard to hear, but I'm going to press this noise. Oh no, is it not going to work? Haha, plot twist, it doesn't work. Anyway, so it is just a kind of like a low grumbling. Like I said, it's called a bellow. They do that to communicate back and forth to one another, depending on how many hippos are in their group. So that is the noise they make. Sometimes this works and sometimes Bubbles does it, but unfortunately couldn't do that for you today, folks.
How big are their teeth, or how long are their tusks?
So the male's tusks can get pretty long. So it just really depends on how often they're opening and closing their mouth if they're going to wear down. But a hippo can open their mouths 180 degrees. Male hippos do that. So just imagine like their mouths being like this. And that is about how long their tusks can be. They can get incredibly long, but like I said, they're ever growing, they're constantly growing, they're constantly wearing down, kind of getting bigger, getting a little bit smaller. It just really depends on the individual, but that was a really great question.
When they feed on hay and grain, is it at night and on land?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when Bubbles gets a majority of her hay and grain, it will be at nighttime. So she's pretty active right now, and that is just because she got a snack. But the likelihood of her doing maybe another lap and then camping out in the middle for the rest of the day is pretty good. She is going to conserve as much energy as possible since they eat such a low calorie diet. But yeah, she gets it at night. She's going to be eating most of it at nighttime.
And what do hippos feel like?
That's a good question. So they're kind of slimy. So something that I didn't talk about before was what they produce to protect their skin. So hippos, I mentioned earlier when Bubbles was coming up and down, kind of refreshing her skin, getting that moisture on it, is they have super sensitive skin. It's very thin, it's very susceptible to sunburn. I don't know about you guys at home, but when I get sunburned, I am miserable. So hippos have an adaptation where they can protect their skin if they're not going to be in a body of water, and they secrete a mucus called blood sweat. And so it's not as gross as it sounds, or maybe it is to some people, but blood sweat is this white mucus that they produce, and then when the sun hits it, it causes some sort of reaction, it oxidizes, and then it turns red. So it looks like blood and it kind of acts like sweat, but it's essentially just built-in sunscreen. So because of that, they're pretty slimy. So that's just what they feel like to me.
And what are these fish in with Bubbles?
That's a good question. So the fish that you see in there, these are cichlids. And cichlids are in there. They have a really important job. And it might be gross to some people, but the cichlids are in there kind of as a cleanup crew. So what they're going to be doing is they are going to be eating the feces that is produced by our hippos. And then they're also going to be eating dead skin off of the hippos. You can see it on Bubbles right now as she's walking by. We've got some cichlids eating some skin off of her back. So they have a really important job. That is just to make sure that Bubbles is clean and making sure that our hippo habitat is clean on top of our filtration system that we have here at the zoo.
And last question, how much does she weigh?
Bubbles weighs around 2,600 pounds, give or take, depending on the day. So she is actually kind of small for an adult female hippo, but she is still at a really good weight. She's still really eager to eat all of her food. But just like some people, like myself, I am only 5'3", so I am not even the average height for most adult women. Some people can be shorter or taller than the average. Like Bubbles is just gonna be smaller than the average. Usually female hippos can range anywhere from 2,500 to maybe 4,000 pounds, and sometimes they can be heavier than 4,000 pounds and still be really healthy. So I think that was our last question, but I'm not done with you guys yet. I want to encourage you guys to do an activity at home since we are kind of staying inside and making sure that we are staying safe and healthy. I want you guys to get up and moving around in your house with your family members, with your guardians, with your grown-ups, and that's to talk about herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores. I want you guys to think about what you are at home. Are you gonna be an herbivore, which is mostly a plant eater? Are you going to be a carnivore, which is only a meat eater? Or are you going to be an omnivore, which is a plant and meat eater? Here's a hint, I'm an omnivore, but some people might be different. I do know lots of herbivores here at the zoo, so it just really depends on what your preference is on what you like to eat. But how I want you to decide this is by maybe helping out your grown-up, your guardian, or your parents, or maybe your older siblings, and by making your next meal with them. Kind of look at what you're going to be putting into your meal, look at what you are using at home to make your meals, and then decide if you are an herbivore, a carnivore, or an omnivore. And when you find that out, maybe take a picture of it, maybe post it to our Facebook page with the hashtag Fort Worth Zoo. That would be really cool. Or you can even go one step further and tell us about your pets. So most of us have pets at home, and the next time that you give your pet a meal, I want you guys to look at what the ingredients are on the bag. Is your dog a carnivore? Is your dog an omnivore? Is your cat a carnivore or an omnivore? And that's one way that you can get involved by figuring out what the animals at home, including yourself, are eating and label yourself as an omnivore, a carnivore, or an herbivore. So that's the activity I want you guys to participate in and then share with us so that we can see it, because we really miss you guys here at the zoo. And we are actually going to be signing off really quick. Here comes Bubbles. She actually came back so that she could say bye to you guys too. And thank you guys so much for coming out to our second Facebook Live session. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day at home.